Hi, I'm Dr. Krista Kurlinkas, practicing grant writing consultant and creator of Grant Writing Made Easy. And I want to talk to you about how to know which grants you're eligible for. So raise your hand if you've ever gotten excited about a grant that you found and started working on, only to realize part of the way through that you're not even eligible for that grant. It's not a great feeling, I know. And yet it happens to grant writers all of the time. Grant makers have their own visions, missions, and funding priorities, and the grant eligibility requirements depend upon. Today, I'm going to share the 4 main eligibility requirements for most grants so that you can quickly assess whether a grant is a good fit before you get too deep into writing it. So the 4 main criteria are geographic location and scope, type of grant applicant, type of funding needed, and your area of interest or field. Now, I want to note here that there is a big difference between being eligible for a grant and being qualified for a grant. The term qualified, as I use it, denotes a higher level of expectation. So don't worry, we do have a video coming up on what it means to get qualified for a grant. But for right now, we're going to focus on how to tell if you are eligible for any particular grant opportunity you come across. Okay, let's start with the easiest one, which is geographic location and scope. Geographic location is where your organization is headquartered, while scope refers to the entire geographic area that your programs serve. So let's say you have a nonprofit located in Boston, Massachusetts. The work you do only has an impact on people in the city of Boston in this particular scenario, so it's localized. Your nonprofit then will be eligible for grants from local, state, and even national grant makers who want to give specifically to organizations located in your city, county, or state. However, there are also grant makers who want to fund organizations that serve the entire country. That doesn't always mean they want your nonprofit to have multiple locations around the country. Instead, it means your work must target and serve people from all over the country. Often these types of nonprofits are advocacy nonprofits, or they work largely in providing services virtually. You'll also often find that smaller family foundations primarily fund just in one state or even one city or one county. That's typically because they are originally from that area, the founder is, and they really want to serve that area. Larger foundations like the Ford Foundation or the Gates Foundation have a much wider geographic scope because they are more mission-driven than geographically driven. Government agencies will also often target specific funding opportunities to one geographic region, but of course not all of their funding. For example, the EPA often awards grants that target specific regions because they have funding set aside just for that region and its particular environmental needs. For example, a grant from the EPA could be for a coastal watershed restoration in the Puget Sound, while another opportunity with the EPA might be for the same need, but in southeast New England. The different types of geographic scope that you will find generally are local, statewide, regional, nationwide, and then international/global. So it's just really important that you are clear on the scope that that particular grant maker wants to serve. The next eligibility criteria is the type of grant applicant that you are. So you probably already know the type of applicant you are. Everybody typically knows that, right? So you're either a 501c3 nonprofit, or maybe you're a government entity or a tribal entity or an independent school district. Maybe you are an individual artist or an academic researcher. Funding announcements always clearly state which type of applicants are eligible for their grants, and often they're very specific about which types of applicants are not eligible. So you can pretty quickly eliminate opportunities that are not for your applicant type and continue on to the next eligibility criteria if you find a match for this one. Next is the type or category of funding that you need. So this refers to the type of projects and expenses that grant monies can be used for by an awardee. There are two main umbrella categories for these: restricted and unrestricted. This is really an internal categorization your organization will use. You won't typically find it in a grant maker's description of their funding type, but you need to be aware of the distinction because it often determines whether you're eligible for a grant. So here is the difference. Restricted funds can be used only for the particular program, project, or expense you identified in the grant application. Unrestricted funds do not have to be used for one specific program only. They fall under the budget category of general operating funds and can therefore be used for administrative costs and be spread across multiple programs. Within restricted funds, there are many subcategories of funding that you may be looking for, including funding for advocacy, building funds, capacity building, program or project support, technical assistance, travel grants, event sponsorships, and so on. So when you're identifying the category of funding you need for your particular grant search that you're doing, try not to think about the type of work you could do in order to get funding. Instead, think about the type of work you're already doing that you absolutely need funding for now. Once that is covered, then begin to develop new programs and projects that could qualify for a wider array of funding. The next grant eligibility criteria is area of interest. So while geographic scope and location, type of grant applicant, and type of funding needed are pretty straightforward, this final eligibility criteria can require a little more thought and planning on your end. Most grant databases allow you to search for funding opportunities by what they call area of interest. So knowing ahead of time which areas your work falls under can really speed up the search process. The key to selecting your area of interest is to initially list as many categories and subcategories that your work might fall under as possible. Of course, that doesn't mean listing things you don't really do, because you won't get funded for those. It means considering your work more broadly, stretching how you define yourself, and looking for new language to describe your projects. For example, if you operate an animal rescue, you aren't going to search only by the subcategory of animal welfare. You'll also want to look under the broader environment and animals category. Now, all of this is because the way grants databases are organized could eliminate a grant from your search results because it doesn't specifically mention the very narrow words that you're using. Back to that animal welfare example, maybe the grant opportunity doesn't mention the words rescue or welfare, but it does mention animals or environment. A grant maker interested in local environmental causes might fund that work as part of their broader philanthropic goal of serving animals or the environment, and they don't necessarily specify those categories or terms in their descriptions. So once you see that you might be eligible, the next step is going to be looking to see how many types of animal rescue or welfare organizations they have actually funded. Okay, so now you might be thinking, how do I start using all of these eligibility criteria to actually search for grants? You can start by listing out, just take a little piece of paper here and list your geographic location and scope, what type of applicant you are, the type of funding you need, and that might be more than one. So let's say that you both need program funding and you need capital funding. Write out everything you need right now, and your area or areas of interest. Then head to your favorite grants database and begin filtering your results based on those criteria. There are lots of grant databases out there, everything from Foundation Directory Online or Candid, and GrantStation, which is what we use, and Instrumental and GrantWatch, and there are even more out there. I encourage you to keep track of which search criteria you are using in that database as you find results, and just mark them off one by one. So you're probably going to use different combinations of categories like geographic location, plus area of interest, maybe plus type of funding. And then once you find everything in that category, you might change one of the terms or just strike one of the terms entirely. So just keep track, on a little notepad, which searches and combinations you've been doing. And I explain how to do all of this strategically inside the Ultimate Guide to Grant Writing. It is a $37 mini course that will help you get started with grant searches, grant writing, grant readiness, and strategic planning today. So I'm going to put the link to that below. If you've already joined Ultimate Guide to Grant Writing, or you're just ready to get the full picture on grant writing and have support along the way, I definitely encourage you to check out my comprehensive online grant writing course, Grant Writing Made Easy. I will also include a link to it below. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you soon.